So picture this. It's early December 2025, and India's biggest airline, IndiGo, just stops. Chaos erupts. Thousands of passengers are suddenly stranded as flights get canceled left and right all across the country. But here's the thing. This wasn't because of bad weather or some typical technical glitch. Nope, this was something way more interesting. A head-on collision between brand new safety rules and the airline's ability to keep up. So let's break down how this one single change triggered a massive nationwide travel meltdown.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll dive into the pure chaos on the ground. Then, we'll figure out the perfect storm of reasons that caused it all. After that, we'll look at the huge ripple effect this had, see how IndiGo tried to fix things, and finally, we'll get into the big debate at the center of it all, safety versus service.
Okay, first up, let's just get a feel for what it was like to be caught in the middle of this. For thousands of people, airports basically turned into zones of total confusion and frustration, and it happened almost overnight. I mean, you had headlines like this one from the Hindustan Times, talking about anxiety and anger. And this wasn't just happening in Chennai. These scenes of total confusion were playing out at every major airport in India, Delhi, Mumbai, you name it. Passengers, a lot of them with really important plans, were just stuck with absolutely no idea what was going on. And if you want to understand just how big this was, just look at this number, 19. That's the number of IndiGo flights canceled on one day at just one airport, Ahmedabad. Now, just try to imagine that kind of disruption happening at airports all over the country. You start to see how this thing snowballed into a massive crisis.
So what were people actually dealing with? Well, flights were getting canceled with barely any warning, leaving people stranded for hours on end, sometimes even overnight. They were stuck in these massive queues, trying to talk to airline staff who were completely overwhelmed and honestly didn't have any answers to give. The complete lack of communication was what really got people angry, and it just threw a wrench in everyone's travel plans.
Which, of course, brings us to the big question. How in the world does this happen to the biggest airline in the country, seemingly out of the blue? Well, it turns out this wasn't just one thing going wrong. It was a perfect storm.
So what was it? What was the actual trigger for this nationwide travel mess? The answer is pretty surprising. It wasn't a computer crash or mechanical failure. It was a new set of rules that were actually designed to make flying safer.
It all comes down to this thing called Flight Duty Time Limitations, or FDTL. Now, the key thing to get here is that these aren't just airline policies. These are government regulations, and they exist for a really, really good reason, to stop pilots from getting too tired. They limit flight hours and make sure pilots get enough rest. It's one of the most basic building blocks of airline safety.
And this timeline, well, it tells the whole story. Earlier in the year, the aviation regulator, the DGCA, says, hey, we're bringing in new, stricter rules to give pilots more rest. Fast forward to December 1st, and boom, those new rules are officially law. Just 3 days later, the entire system just collapses. Reports of cancellations start flooding in from everywhere. That timing? Yeah, that's no coincidence.
So here's the bottom line. The crisis was a direct result of these tougher safety rules smashing right into an airline scheduling system that just wasn't ready for them. IndiGo literally couldn't figure out how to schedule its pilots and crew under the new limits without canceling a ton of flights.
But the fallout from this, it didn't just stay in the airport terminals. The chaos spread, and it created this huge ripple effect that was felt across the entire country's transportation system.
Yeah, this very quickly stopped being just an airline problem. As thousands and thousands of people were left high and dry, they started scrambling for any other way to get where they were going.
And the knock-on effect was just huge. Get this, Indian Railways had to add 116 extra coaches to 37 different trains. This wasn't some planned upgrade. This was an emergency move to handle the sudden flood of people who got kicked off their flights and were now swarming the train stations. And if you break it all down, you can see the impact here. Of course, the biggest piece of the pie was the disruption to passengers, but right behind that was the massive strain this put on other systems, like the railways. And for IndiGo, well, this was a huge hit to their reputation and, obviously, their bottom line.
Okay, so with people getting angrier by the minute and the media all over this story, IndiGo had to do something. The airline was completely on the defensive, trying to fix the operational nightmare while also dealing with a PR disaster.
So, the public response came from the top, from IndiGo's CEO, Peter Elbers. He came out and admitted what the problem was, saying the airline was busy recalibrating its crew rosters to meet the new rules, and he promised they'd get back to normal as fast as they could.
So what did their crisis plan look like?
Well, first, they admitted there was a scheduling problem. Then came the apology to all the affected passengers. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they were scrambling to completely rework their crew schedules. And slowly but surely, it started to work. Operations began to stabilize.
And it wasn't just the airlines saying things were getting better. Pretty soon, we started hearing it from other sources. Authorities at major airports like Delhi started reporting that, yup, IndiGo schedules were starting to look normal again. It was a sign that the worst was finally over.
And all of that brings us to the final and maybe the most important piece of this whole puzzle. Because if you boil it all down, this entire incident is about a fundamental tension in the airline world. That constant trade-off between keeping people safe and actually providing a service.
This right here captures the dilemma perfectly. On one side, you have the goal of these new rules, which is awesome. Better safety. That means more rested pilots, less risk of anyone making a mistake because they're tired, and just higher standards overall. You can't argue with that. But then, on the other side, you have the immediate consequence of a clumsy rollout, a total service meltdown, mass cancellations, stranded passengers, and chaos everywhere.
So the big takeaway here is just how delicate that balance really is. Regulators and airlines are constantly walking this incredibly fine line. I mean, how do you push for stronger safety, which we all want, without accidentally bringing the whole system to a grinding halt? It really shows that it's not just about what rules you make, but how you put them into practice.
And that leaves us with this one last really big question to think about. Was this week of absolute chaos just an acceptable price to pay for the long-term good of having safer skies and better rested pilots? Or does it show a much bigger problem with how these huge changes are rolled out? It's a tough one, and there's definitely no easy answer.